Welcome to Show Money, the only show exclusively dedicated to the business of mixed martial arts. I'm Paul Gift, the economist, and once again we have Jason Cruz, our lawyer, and John Nash, the man who knows everyone and everything in MMA, and I'm starting to believe boxing as well. And it is going to be dedicated to Thursday's hearing. We're recording this on Friday morning, but it'll probably go up around Sunday. Thursday's hearing on the Muhammad Ali Expansion Act into MMA. Jason Cruz, you were live tweeting it as it went along. What were your impressions of the hearing?
Well, so this was the Congressional Subcommittee hearing on the Ali Act, and it was a much more productive and much more informational than last year's congressional hearing, if for those that recall. It centered around the expansion of the Ali Act, and had some very interesting witnesses: Randy Couture, Mark Ratner, Greg Serb, and a later ad was Dr. Kristen Dams O'Connor. I thought that it was informational from a lot of standpoints. One, they went over, well, from my perspective, I thought that they went over 37 issues. The first being the fighter rankings, which I think that we'll go very in depth on as far as that, as it relates to the Ali Act currently and how it could be applied for combats for MMA, especially the UFC. Second one that I think was addressed was coercive contracts, which Randy Couture kind of handled as far as in the Q&A. And then the third one was head trauma, and I thought that was this was an interesting viewpoint from an outsider's perspective, and I think we could elaborate that little later on as it may relate to a mainstream support for the Ali Act. But those are kind of my broad brushes as far as the hearing. I thought it was really much more informative than last year's hearing. So, guys, what do you think, John? How did you see the hearing?
I thought it was much better than last year's. It had some. They actually went into depth on certain things, especially what we're all interested in, because it's HR 44, the Muhammad Ali Expansion Act, is the bill that's been going through Congress. That's the concern or the interest by most people. So they went into depth of that. I like that they talked a little bit about the medical stuff, the health and safety. In a weird way, though, I almost think there should have been two hearings. Two separate, almost two separate investigations, so we could separate the two, because each one deserves, I think, a lot of its own in-depth examination without because sometimes it gets a little distracting. We're talking about financial security for a fighter, and then suddenly we get off into regulations and health and safety standards. And like, well, they're two different concerns, so let's stay focused on one. But beyond that, I thought it was, if you watched it, it was fairly entertaining. There were some fireworks, there was some squabbling, there was some Zuffa myth brought up, which is always entertaining. So all that was entertaining. Paul, what was your thought?
Well, my major thought, because I wrote about it at Forbes this morning, so anyone who's listening should go check that out. That I wasn't thrilled with how Mullen used a very direct answer from Mark Ratner about regulation in the sport, where he answered it clearly and directly, and Mullen essentially used that as justification for sort of inferring that Ratner was either being deceitful or didn't clarify enough when he was very clear. So I didn't like the way he did that. But other than that, I agree with you that the medical, the head trauma stuff, while interesting, it felt like it didn't really belong there. But then you get into the guts of the issue, and you've got Randy Couture doing his usual speech about how, right, if this was around, he wanted to fight Fedor, he would have been able to, and you're just saying to yourself, well, is that true, right? I mean, of course that would have been great for him back at the time, but the question is, with this new legislation, would that be true? And correct me if I'm wrong, guys. There hasn't been a second draft of this legislation, correct? We're still on the first one.
That is correct.
Yeah, and when you read through that draft, like, it's just hard to follow. What I do is I basically took it and put it into the old one so that I can actually follow what the hell is going on, right? And when you go through there, you're just saying, well, where's the part about free agency? Where exactly would that be in this draft that we're seeing right here? And it leads into something, John, that I'm sure you're going to say about the court system in this case. So I'll let you take it away.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hard. I mean, the Ali Act on itself doesn't do much. That's the thing. People, there's almost too much inference that the Ali Act does all these things, and it's gonna, it's gonna drastically change the system. And there's a lot of misleading information out there too. People seem to have this weird idea that you only have contracts for a year, and that you're allowed to fight for any promoter every fight. Just bizarre stuff. None of that's true. Most of the stuff in MMA would stay exactly the same. The big thing the Ali Act would do is, one, there are some questions. How would we interpret it based on past case history about, does the UFC have a sanction? Would the UFC, I should say, be allowed to continue giving titles out themselves? It seems, based on the UFC's testimony, Ratner, he seems to think that the Ali Act would separate sanctioning bodies from the promotion. That was what somebody brought up as would happen. So I guess their point of view, they think that'll happen. That's one. But if it goes into effect, if that happens, all these other previous cases that were done in boxing, most famously, one of the most important is the Zuffa versus the WBA, which gives fighters the rights to their title, would come into effect. And so technically, if the Ali Act was in effect and it was interpreted like in boxing, there's no rule that says Fedor and Couture would have to fight, but it seems likely if there was at least one sanctioning body that ranked Fedor, had Fedor's 1 and then Couture at 2, it would have demanded a mandatory match between the two, and that's where I think Randy Couture is getting in, that fight would have happened. But that's, hey, listen, we got a legal expert here. We should ask him what he thinks. Some of the Yahoo talk, and let's
just looking up Zuffa versus WBA. If you're interested, Google it, and you'll be an expert like myself as well. But that actually, as you guys pointed out before we got on, happened in '82, which was before the Ali Act. So I mean, it would be interesting to see how the application of the Ali Act would be addressed in that situation. I think that the interesting thing that was pointed out by Greg Serb during the hearing, as well as Mark Ratner, is the indication that there's weak case law for the Ali Act, meaning that enforcement hasn't happened there. And I think Ratner indicated that there hasn't been a case brought under the Ali Act, which is true because I believe he was indicating that under the Ali Act, the U.S. attorney actually can enforce and go in and sue a promoter or sue somebody. That's something under the Ali Act that can be done. No, I don't believe there's any cases out there that's actually where the U.S. attorney has affirmatively sued somebody. I think that's the indication he's making. There have been fighters now that have sued under the Ali Act. They've sued promoters and managers and things like that. I think there's that sort of distinguishing factor that was not clarified during the hearing. As far as the weakness of the Ali Act in far as legal enforcement, yeah. I mean, I wrote about it a while back, and as it is presented now, the text of the proposed legislation doesn't have a lot of bite. It just doesn't. And I assume that there'll be a lot of rewriting before we can get to a place where I would think that their enforcement would be much more, have a little more bite and concern to enforce the law.
Well, I actually, the people that are pushing it, I don't think they care if the federal government enforces.
No, yeah, I don't think so. I think that was kind of brought up just because to kind of bring up, hey, it hasn't been enforced.
When you hear Mazie talk, he's always saying it would be the MMAFA that would enforce it. Remember?
Yeah, that's the plan. That's their plan, that they would. I mean, the one thing I talked to 3 boxing attorneys this week. All 3, that have handled Ali Act cases where they've sued using the Ali Act on behalf of their fighters, and all of them said they all basically say it hasn't done what it's supposed to do. It hasn't been it's never enforced by the federal government. And it hasn't had the impact they hoped, but it does do stuff because they use it. They use it all the time. And even if they don't sue someone, they'll write a letter saying, hey, you better comply or we're going to take you to court under the Ali Act. And so promoters will cave in or sanctioning bodies will cave in knowing they could lose tens of millions of dollars under that. So in that way it works. The MMAFA's plan, the reason they're putting this forward is they're not a union, they can't strike. So their plan is that if we have an association, associations can sue on behalf of their members. They can represent their members in these type of cases. So if you're a member of the MMAFA, God damn, I hate these acronyms for these associations. If you're a member of the MMAFA and they think the promoter crossed you, they can bring up they don't need the federal government or the athletic commissions to do anything. They can step in and sue directly that promoter, or a sanctioning body if they exist. They can sue sanctioning bodies to make them honest. That's their plan. The question comes, can the MMAFA get enough members, be powerful enough that they can actually accomplish it? It's just a few people. It's not going to, it's going to be hard to put the resources together to do a lot of lawsuits. If it's a couple hundred members, or especially the top guys, then shit. Then you get nervous every time you make a mistake as a promoter, because they might be on you.
Right. So technically our incentive should be for this thing to pass so that Maisie can go lawsuit crazy and we can have a lot to talk about, right? Yeah. Jason, let me ask you a question. So the Ali Act, as it's drafted right now, doesn't forbid exclusive contracts. It doesn't forbid 2 to 3 year exclusive contracts, right? And so it's not clear how there's this system of forcing the #1 contender to fight at least every once in a while. Or the promoter to allow them to fight at least every once in a while for the title. But how would that work? How do you think that would work if you've got let's say a 3-year exclusive contract, but then there's also might be this thing where the #1 contender is supposed to fight and that #1 contender happens to be in a different promotion?
It would work. I mean, I think that's where you'd have to, there'd be a overhaul of the contract based on the Ali Act, if that is the case. Because, and this is where I maybe, didn't think that the rankings meant a lot in the Ali Act, but now I kind of see more and more that the rankings component of the Ali Act might have a lot more emphasis here, in the fact that if the #2 contender is in Bellator and you're the #1 contender, I mean, if you're the champion in the UFC or #1 ranked person in the UFC, but you have an exclusive contract, you can't break your contract. Therefore, I would assume that the contract would have to have exclusions or some sort of provision saying that, hey, if the #2 contender or the top challenger, whatever, is in another promotion, you have that right to coordinate that fight. But again, that would kind of you'd have to retool these contracts in that certain way. It would do away with exclusivity, I would think, under the assumption that you'd have to the rankings could be enforced under that type of Ali Act.
But the UFC is not just going to give that up. You'd expect that would be another battle in the future.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I definitely think that you would see a fight. And I mean, obviously you're seeing it right now with the lobbying efforts going on, that the UFC doesn't want to give up their exclusivity for a lot of reasons. Obviously you don't want to get a guy hurt in an interpromotional match and they're out. And there's your guy now injured because of an interpromotional match where the UFC didn't receive all of the financial benefits of its contracted fighter.
You also don't, I mean, I think the bigger concern is you don't want the guy to lose to someone from another, that's owned by another promoter, and then suddenly like, oh, the #1 fighter is no longer under our contract. I don't think the thing is, even if it gets passed and it gets passed the way it's written, it's going to make a drastic change in kind of how titles are made, and there might be some co-promotion, but I don't think it's going to change too much, because UFC is so farther ahead of the next #2 promotion, Bellator. Like, they're making 30, 35 times as much revenue, that occasionally they might have to co-promote. But if it ever goes to a purse bid, like in boxing, UFC is never going to lose. Who's going to plus the UFC brand adds several 100,000 probably pay-per-view buys to any big match they do. So they're like, well, we have this much buffer to work with, so we can outbid you. You have to go into money loss range, and no matter what, we'll make a profit on our bid. So I I don't think it'll change. What'll change is they'd have to spend a lot. And let's not forget one thing too about this. There's a way out. If this gets, it's a long ways to go. It's got to pass. I think it's going to pass Congress. I called some congressional offices, and my thinking, and based on what Mullen told me the other day, I think it's going to pass Congress. I think it's going to, how much is, they're looking at how many votes. They want a huge buffer. Senate's the other question. But let's say it passes. There is an out for the UFC. And Mullen even told me the UFC has a choice. Either be a league, in which case they make their fighters employees, or don't be Don King, as he says, the Don King of MMA. You have to start, if you're going to keep the boxing format independent contractors, you got to start treating it like boxing. You can't own the titles. So if they want to own the titles and be a league as they say, then they make the fighters employees. Then I think the Ali Act disappears. That's another out. That's another possibility.
Clarify what you said there. You think it's going to pass Congress, or you think it's going to pass the House, and you're not sure about the Senate? The
House of Representatives it'll pass. I should have said the House of Representatives, not the Senate. The Senate, I don't know. But if it blows past their thinking is that they get 270 votes in the House of Representatives, and it's bipartisan, it'll go into Congress with a lot of momentum and just sweep through Senate. And then pass. Yeah. So because no one's gonna. It's not, for most politicians, it's not that important to bill. They'll say, "Oh wow, a lot of support, sign off, let's get going."
So I think that what the support they need is from people like Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. I think I said that I thought she was the star of that hearing, simply because she laid it out. Hey, I'm not a fan. I don't like the blood. It's not my cup of tea. That's what she essentially said. She's for those that didn't see the hearing, she's about a 70-year-old, mid-70s congressperson from Illinois, I believe, and she essentially said, I'm not a fan of it, but I support the bill. And because she believes that there should be issues regarding fighter safety. And I thought that she was very thoughtful in her questions. And I thought when she talked to the doctor about the testimony about head injuries and head trauma and youth participation, I thought that kind of resonates with people that aren't fans of MMA. They will see that and say, hey, the fighters should be be protected. And I think that will hold more so than the rankings argument for just rank and file legislatures.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching that and I was thinking, man, this could backfire. They're just going to ban MMA because this is like we're going to show these people who've never watched it before. We're going to see a fight where someone just gets walloped where they don't stop it. Like what was it? Cyborg versus who was it when she beat up
Finney.
Jan Finney, yeah. Or remember when Chris Chris Holodecki, the kid that had the baby face. Hodecki. Remember he used to always get beat up in WC and it would look awful. Like this little boy would be running away from people and get beat up. They show him those fights. People are like, we got to ban this sport. This is awful. So that was I thought, wow, MMA is not going to get out of this at all. But we made it through. We luckily made it through. So.
What did you think of Randy Couture's? What do you guys think of Randy Couture's testimony? I mean, he said a lot of what we've already heard. One area where that Rob Mazy was like, what are you doing? Why did you say that? Is like when he was talking about the transparency, that question on transparency, and he's like, well, there's no transparency now. They don't have to disclose. And he goes, you can find it on public record if you have the wherewithal to look it up. And you know that Rob Mazy's like, why did you say that? Actually it made a mistake because his written statement is really good. But it's so long. It's like someone should have edited the heck out of it because his witness testimony, how they publish the ahead of time what he's going to read. Mm-hmm. You read it, go, well, that makes a really strong case. He goes all through but you should have abbreviated so you could actually get to that. He only got like a third of the way through it.
Yeah,
right.
Cut him off. Yeah.
Right. I don't think you have to go through the individual numbers. They did 830 million here and 230 million from this, and like you could have just lumped it all together and saved yourself, a paragraph of material. But it's the UFC has. I tell you what, just by appearances, it helps the proponents of the Ali Act that they can go in and say, oh, the UFC sold for $4 billion. And this is how much money they make per year. And, now that these documents are out that we see this stuff and this is how much we make per year, and that these things come out and they're like, well, it just, the discrepancy looks so it's such a difference in discrepancy in pay between what the fighters make and the promoters that of course the promoter being only the UFC. I'm sure if you looked at the paperwork of any other promoter, it'd be the exact opposite, that they're, you know, they're falling apart. But just on the UFC side, that helps their argument, because they can hold that to a lot of, I guess that helps them with the liberal Dem socialist types that are going to look at that and say, oh my God, that's so unfair. Why are they making all the money? So they got that going for them. But it's, you know, it was, I guess for you guys' opinion, I'll ask both of you. I'll start with you, Paul. Who do you think came out better, the pro or anti-Ali Act proponents in this? Pro or
anti-Ali Act proponents? I mean, I definitely think it would still be the pro-Ali Act proponents. Again, even though I wish, like, I didn't love Mullins' tactic, and I wish the testimony just spoke for itself, because these are important concepts, topics that we're talking about here. For people like us who follow it, it rehashed a lot of things that we've already heard. I mean, there wasn't a lot in there that was new, except really for hearing from Serb. And was Ratner at the last hearing? I don't remember.
No, it was Invicta.
Yeah, right. You know, looking back on it, it feels like the UFC should have perhaps brought someone different. Not that Mark Ratner did anything wrong, just someone who could think a little bit more quickly on his toes, because once Mullins started attacking him, he kind of stumbled a few times there, and it wasn't a good look, right? But in terms of new issues, were any new issues raised that you guys weren't terribly aware of? I mean, I feel like we've heard many of the same things before about fighter rankings, about it will bring in free agency, it will allow fighters to get their worth, it will financial disclosures so we can see, even though you slip in the thing that says you can find it on public record. But was there anything new that you guys found?
No, I mean, not in the hearing. Sorry to interrupt, but not. I mean, this week talking to guys, there's a lot of new stuff. I knew stuff I hadn't realized before. But in the hearing itself, no, it was actually no, it was one thing new, and I thought this was a mistake. And I'll go to Jason right away after this. Was the UFC in their testimony by Ratner? Now he's going to leave, and I won't be able to hand it off to him. But in the testimony by Ratner, in his written testimony.
Hold on.
Okay, that was scary. In his written testimony, Ratner, he brought up that the UFC uses rankings for a meritocratic system of who gets title shots, and that struck me as that you guys have rankings, but you don't really use them, and that just seemed. I thought it was first time I've ever heard the UFC acknowledge they use them, and also I thought it was a mistake by them to acknowledge it, because they seem to ignore it a lot, or they have it by saying that they have the rankings, and you can pull fighters off that don't agree to the contract terms. It shows the amount of influence those rankings have. Jace, what are your thoughts on that?
So, I thought that I think the issue of Ratner testifying was an interesting one, because, I think he was the perfect person to be there to testify, because, here's why.
I know why. I'm waiting for this.
Here's why. Because, there is so I'll relate it to kind of the law kind of here. So if you sue a guy who has Joe's construction company, and you want to talk to Joe because he's the owner, and you show up, you want to depose the guy, you want to ask him questions at a deposition, and you show up, and Tim from Joe's construction company shows up, and you say, well, why is Tim here, not Joe? Well, Tim's here because he knows a lot about the business. And so, we'll ask Tim the questions. Well, Tim will be a nice guy, answer some questions. But then when it comes to interesting facts about Joe's business, Tim will say, I don't deal with that part of the business. Joe does. I don't know. I just, and so relaying that to Ratner's testimony, I thought he was great. He had the tie, so which you have because you want to have people look at the tie, not the testimony. And I thought that a lot of the questions he deferred on the quasi cross-examination by Mullen. To be honest with you, I didn't have any problem with Mullen. A lot of this stuff is dramatics. So for him to kind of cross-examine him in a way, cut him off, you know, some of that has to do with the filibustering issue. You know, you don't want your time to be taken by him to talk about how great UFC 217 was. So to cut him off, I mean, it looks rude, but it might have been realistic a thing to do, just to cut him off, because that was not the question. Happens a lot in depositions where people just kind of go off the rails, and it's your job to stop them, and it's Ratner's job to talk about what he wants to talk about.
In Ratner's defense, UFC 217 was very good.
It was very good. That's why I want to talk about it.
But I think you're. I mean, I don't think it might be a coincidence, but I'm not sure it's a coincidence that Ratner, who's in charge of regulation, and Nowitzki, who is in the USADA program, were the two guys they've sent to the hearings. They didn't send anybody that handles contracts. They didn't handle anybody that handles the finances. They handled. And one thing, Ratner. You were right, Paul. Mullen was wrong, and in accusing of bringing up the sanctioning, the titles, and the rankings. With Ratner, never said anything about the titles, but he did say in his opening testimony, he brought up rankings, and Ratner did say that boxing and MMA on the regulation side are treated the same, but they're not actually. When he mentioned the contracts, contractually, in ACs, the athletic commissions, boxing promoters have to hand in the contract. And are not allowed to collect any money from the bout until they hand them in under perjury, under oath.
Penalty of perjury.
Penalty of perjury, that this is the only agreements in the fight. That doesn't, MMA doesn't have that. So Mullen missed an opportunity to actually point out something that
right. And so call him on that. Right. Call him on that.
No, this is pro wrestling. This is theater. We don't care about that. We want to,
was that meant as a fleeting comment?
And let me say, Jason, I totally agree with you on that. The point that I was getting at was there someone else? Like Ratner just, you could tell that when the pressure got on him, he couldn't handle it. He didn't handle it that well. And he started out, you could even look at his body language. He started out, he was sort of like wide like this, just hanging out, answering questions. And once Mullen started
he hunches over
in here like this,
yeah,
and he's just, you could tell he doesn't want to be there, and he's stumbling in his answers. So it's, could you have that guy who can still say, I don't know, but who's a little bit more equipped to take the heat? That's what I was wondering.
I mean, and the thing is, like, so we queried, you know, why wasn't Lawrence Epstein there to testify? And Steve Morocco, MMA Junkie, actually responded to me saying that he had familiar obligation. He was not available, and at some point he will be available. That would be an interesting thing to see if Epstein actually does testify. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I kind of think of it, if you just recently saw, you know, when, oh gosh, when Facebook testified before, the Minnesota governor.
Al Franken.
Al Franken.
Oh, yeah, well, both Amy, I think Amy Klobuchar and Al Franken both were there.
Yeah, but I mean,
when Al Franken put his hands in his face because he couldn't stand the answers.
Yeah, and that was Facebook's lead counsel, I think, that was talking about the issues. But anyway, let's get off the political issues.
No, that's really fascinating. Let's go back to Facebook. Oh, just kidding. I'm really fascinated by that whole
exchange with Al Franken
monopolies. You know, no, it was. I actually thought Ratner was good because I felt bad for him. Like, this man,
yeah.
You're like, why am I here? I'm being put into this because no one else wants to show up. And he just wanted to like hug him and say, sorry, you know, man, you're in charge of regulation. You shouldn't be here answering questions about sanctioning bodies and ranking. You have nothing to do with that. Epstein or Dana White or someone should be here taking this grilling.
Yeah, but it was his day to take the bullet.
Yeah, well, that's why he collects a paycheck, I guess.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it beats him showing up with Joe on the broadcast and getting wrong on what the rules say. I mean, nothing against Ratner, but damn, you should know the damn rules by now.
In his defense, the rules, there are no rules. There are regulations in every single state. That's what I keep getting drilled into me. But that was an easy one. He should have known that one. Yeah. The knee down. I think it was the knee down one, right?
Yeah.
It was, well, in his defense too, I think he just freezes up on TV. I think he's one of those guys. Oh crap! There's millions watching me. What do I say?
We just learned that second data point that we got on that day. One other thing about what he said. Do you guys think it? I mean, I imagine it was just he misspoke a bit. But when they were talking about pay-per-view, and he says the ones who fight on pay-per-view are really our partners. They have the right to audit the pay-per-view numbers. Right? When he says that, it comes off as any fighter who fights on pay-per-view has the right to audit the numbers, and they all know, quote unquote, their worth, even though it's really showing the headliner's worth, right? Yeah. You think that was a misstatement there?
Yeah, I think it's just a misstatement. I think he meant that people that collect pay-per-view points have the right to audit. But I mean, talking to people, very few guys ever take advantage of that right to audit because, I mean, I guess they're dissuaded from using it. And it's the right to audit. It's a limited. You have to show up in Vegas with one person, like an accountant, and you're given like a day or something to look through the books. So it's not like, you know, they give a full. I mean, one thing the disclosure in the Ali Act is, even though it's not perfect, there's all these issues, there's all these questions too when they have to disclose to you. As a boxer, if you look, like there's forms they give, and it gives you, okay, this is how much money we're making from pay-per-view, or what we estimate to make. Because if it's before the bout, they'll tell you the estimation, and this is what we're getting from foreign TV and local TV, and the ticket sales, and, you know, sponsors and concessions. So you have it's, as a MMA guy, you might be on a card thinking we did pretty good. We might know the pay-per-view sales, but you might not realize, holy crud, we're selling this fight for $3 million in Brazil. I didn't know that. There's this much money coming in because there's Brazilians are interested in this card, and there's $1 million from Europe, and you know, we're making $3 million off sponsors off this card. So there's all this other financial disclosure that's not revealed to MMA fighters, which everybody says would make something of an impact in negotiations. I'm not sure it would, because what are you going to do with that information? But everybody tells me that makes an impact on negotiations.
I mean, if you're like even in the 3 or 4 hole or something like that from the top, it's like you're not driving that car. They're going to pretend like it's their numbers, but it would help the headliner. It would also help the headliner to know where those numbers are coming from, like where exactly are you more popular, or you can think with the agent in terms of sponsorships and stuff like that.
You need to know how big the pie is to ask how big of a piece you get. That's what I think that was served.
That's served, yeah. Although it was not quite phrased that elegantly. It was like, what type of pie piece did you take or something?
I mean, Thanksgiving's coming up, so
yeah,
pumpkin
is good. I mean, I don't think it matters. It's the size, not if it's pumpkin or apple. I'm not sure, but I don't know. Pecan maybe is more valuable. Who knows? But yeah, that was. But another interesting two boxing guys tell me is what happens after a while is that disclosure becomes less important because you get so much information from so many fights. You start realizing, even if they're not fully honest or if something's missing, where you can basically build up the business plan and you know how much they should be making from each section. So you can, even if they wait to tell you the information too late for negotiations, you go into negotiations knowing, hey, we've done this 100 times. We know that you're going to sell this to, you know, Philippines for 300,000, but you're going to get 700,000 from Japan. You know what I'm saying? Like, and 200,000 from Europe. So we know all the pieces that are coming in for this type of fight because we've seen the information for the last 10 years. So it gives managers, I mean, that's why top boxers have so much more sophisticated management than MMA guys do, because they have something they can actually do. There's nothing to do in MMA. Just show up and tell your guy to fight. Maybe you can get an appearance at a car wash or something for him.
Well, yeah, it's always too late. It's always too late. You get the information after the fight and you're already under contract that you signed, whatever, a year ago or something, right? So it's always got to be about the future. That's the thing about the talk, like, oh, I would have known how much I'm worth in that event. It's like, it wouldn't have mattered. It only matters for your next negotiation, just like you're saying.
Yeah, but it would have mattered if for years people have been collecting that information. So your manager going in knows what previously people had made and what the business pays for that. And what also the Ali Act is supposed to do, it's supposed to increase competition, especially if the sanctioning body is put into place. If the UFC or Bellator doesn't own their titles, someone else has the titles, then to be the #1 fighter, you do not have to sign with either of those promotions. You can sign with one or the other or someone else and build your way up and finally get a title shot. And that's one of the thinkings behind it, is that a fighter does not have to accept lower terms to promote from, let's say he wants to go to the UFC and eventually fight for the championship. They don't have to accept lower terms or or more onerous terms from the UFC just to get into the UFC. They can wait it out and go somewhere else and say, you cannot, I can eventually still rise and get a shot at the title. You can't deny that to me. That's the thinking behind it. But again, the UFC has so much money that they want to do. I just think it's just the UFC will just start paying more, especially for the top guys. That's what they'll be forced to do. So if it passes, they'll to keep their position in the market, which is good, you know, or they make them employees, which people that want fighters to be employees. That's good.
And that's the part that, and the part that you just mentioned is the part that people think that even if this passes, right, they have to get enough votes to get past Trump, because we know that Dana White and Trump are still, or at least we believe they're still good buddies, right? And the talk is like, oh, if this passes, it'll be this, it'll be that, everything will change, right? And what we were talking about off camera before starting our filming is that probably in the beginning, nothing would change. And so, Jason, how long do you think, let's assume this passes as is. What changes do you think would be implemented over time, and how long, and how many legal dollars do you think it would take to get there?
Well,
in other words, describe for us the world post-Ali Act if assuming this passes.
Well, I'm going to get back into legal business. That's what I'm going to do. I think that if it's as presently drafted, if it passes, I am not sure how much of a harbinger of doom it would be for the UFC until they are hit with a lawsuit. UFC or Bellator or PFL or any other organization. I think that there would have to be a lawsuit by a fighter or a fight organization representing fighters to see what happens, because essentially, like, looking at the act itself, they've talked about it. We've talked about it. It has little legal bite. And even if you were to look through the Ali Act cases under boxing, you haven't seen a lot of wins by fighters, if any wins. And I think that you would do you're the economist, the risk-benefit analysis.
Cost-benefit analysis. Come on.
Okay. Anyway, you knew that. Anyway, so you'd say to your legal team, hey, how much would it cost if we get hit by a lawsuit? Well, it depends on who it is. Is it John Jones? Is it or is it Joe Schmo Fight Pass guy? Well, if it's a Fight Pass guy, well, we could handle it because they don't have a lot of money. If it's John Jones or a upper tier guy, Conor McGregor, maybe it's worth talking to him before they go to legal route. But in essence, what I'm saying is, attorneys will want to see a lawsuit under these things and see how it plays out, because there's a lot of ambiguity in the act. There's a lot of issues related to disclosure in the act that would be thought of. And then now, again, the rankings issue would be something that I'm not sure how I would think that a lawsuit would happen due to the rankings issue under the Ali Act. So we could see from that aspect that if it's passed, nothing will happen until someone files a lawsuit. Yeah,
and sorry, John, do you have something on that?
No, that was good. No, yeah, I think it's I don't know how big a drastic change it'll have. I mean, there'll be changes. There'll be, there's actually there's such a wide, there's so many variables of what could happen. It's almost impossible to declare. I think, let's say it passes. One thing that could happen is if it passes the way it is written, I think he's right. There's gonna be lawsuits. It's not gonna be won't have to be a ton of lawsuits, but the sanctioning body one has to be decided, because right now there's no pre-existing sanctioning bodies in MMA. And I talked to people in boxing, and some of them thought, no, it wouldn't apply because of what the purpose of the Ali Act was, so they wouldn't make MMA make sanctioning bodies. Others said, well, I think they would they'd have to have sanctioning bodies. They'd have to get rid of the titles. And based on how the athletic commissions and the UFC viewed it yesterday, it seems that they kind of think that way too. So that'd be the first one. You'd have to sue to say, can a promoter own a title? It would have to be private action because the federal government's never going to step in. Someone will have to sue. One thing you could do, MMA guys, they could probably sue a smaller promoter that doesn't have the finances to fight back as well. So you could win that. That would be the first one to decision. That would make if that happened, the sanctioning bodies, that's the only one that would be a drastic change to the world we live in right now if that gets passed. If they say we need sanctioning bodies. Otherwise, it's disclosure. They might have to come to some compromise without sanctioning bodies. Maybe they say, listen, you cannot have a championship clause by owning your own title. Or, you know, maybe they put back the old cap that was originally planned in the Ali Act, that contracts can't be over a certain number of years no matter what, that there's a sunset provision. I do know, I mean, things have been changing for MMA. If you look at a current UFC contract compared to a few years ago, and obviously this is probably the result of the antitrust lawsuit, they're different. They've gotten rid of some of the most onerous provisions in the old UFC contracts. So that's been changing. So something similar would probably happen now, or they would have to change the contracts to fit the new Ali Act. But the big one would be what's going to happen with the sanctioning bodies. And even then, I think the UFC would survive because their brand is so valuable. They make so much money. They would outbid everybody.
And that's the thing. That's the thing. Oh, sorry.
Or they become employees if it passes, you know, or they make the fighters employees and don't worry about the Ali Act.
But that's the thing about all these. One, whether this works or not, I think in small ways it is creating incremental change, just like the antitrust lawsuit. And then if it does work, I'd imagine if you're at the UFC, you're thinking of cost benefit analysis and risk reward and all that, but you're saying essentially using a little bit of game theory and saying, look, what is the one thing that we don't want to happen here, which is the game changer is if a required #1 contender matchup can break your exclusivity. That is the potential game changer in terms of the UFC's business model that they don't do. And so I'd imagine that they're being a little strategic, trying to put up the best fight they can, but their #1 goal at the end of the day is to make sure that does not happen, which is what we'll see, which seems to me why you saw a lot of stress in the hearing about rankings and free agency and #1 contender matchups, and that the UFC is probably willing to give up a little bit if they have to. They probably don't want to, but probably willing to give up a little bit along the way, financial disclosures and other things, even sanctioning bodies. If somehow, some way they can prevent that required #1 contender matchup, that would violate their exclusive contracts, because that's when the business model starts to potentially look a lot different, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big one. They want to. That's their whole business plan, is that UFC only counts. UFC's only matters, and if you suddenly have to. The big risk the UFC always is that there's let's say a mandatory bout and their guy loses and they no longer have the top fighter. Although again, the alternative would be to get rid of championship clause to make it easier for a fighter to leave if he wants to. In other words, force that you have to give him a chance to negotiate when he's at his most valuable, with leverage in his favor. But that's something the UFC doesn't want to, because they got to pay him more. Think of GSP. If there was no provisions in his contract if they didn't freeze it, they weren't able to freeze his contract when he retired. If he really came back as a full free agent, or if Conor McGregor, there's no championship clause sitting at the end of Conor McGregor's contract, right?
There might be. We never know with him.
Well, his previous one, I'm pretty sure, had a championship clause, but he's probably trying to work on a new one. But I'm saying that think of how much more leverage you suddenly have. It's suddenly like, crap, this guy, we have nothing to hold over him to get him to renegotiate with us.
Right.
And that's huge. That's huge. And that trickles down. And, you know, it's we had a solution a while ago. We already talked about it. I think the UFC should have guidelines. They should write their own guidelines, give people some sort of there's no reason why they can't operate. Maybe it was smart not to. They might have gotten more trouble with this, you know, because they have their own sanctioning body then. But there really is no reason why the UFC can't have guidelines saying that the #1, whatever ranked fighter gets a chance every year to fight for the title, is guaranteed to fight for it. We can't skip certain guys. We have a formula, and these guys get a chance at the title every year. So you don't have, because it's as much as people maybe love Hendo and GSP versus Bisping, it really does hurt your Yoel Romero's and Whitakers and Rockholds that they have no clue when they're going to fight, that they're going to get a shot, that the title is worth so much, that adds so much prestige and value to your name, and they have no clue when they're going to fight. So it'd be nice if they had that on, and then, you know, but who knows? You know, it is what it is.
Yeah, because you'll have a situation where GSP has the title, and then he wants to go to the other, you know, he wants to bump down to welterweight, and what's Robert Whitaker to do? You know, just in a bad situation.
Yeah, the number one guy, the guy that Bisping has been he's been the number one fighter for like 18 months now, but the guy that's the next guy has not got a shot in the last 18 months. So those guys have been waiting for a chance. I mean, that's for them. Maybe the UFC made more money and it's financially smarter for the UFC to do the fights they did, but the guys that were second, that were looking for a shot, they lost out on potentially hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars because they didn't get a shot.
Yeah.
So for the business, yeah, it might have been better for the UFC, but for those individual fighters, they lost a fortune.
Right.
Potentially lost a fortune.
Yeah, they could have been preemptive on it, with exceptions so that we don't see Demetrius Johnson fighting Joseph Benavidez like every other year, because that would make me want to blow my brains out.
Well, like I said, you can always have rules. Like if you've lost to the guy, you could have like 3 years before you have to be declared mandatory again or something bizarre. But then you can have the mandatory number one challenger fights. There's a bunch of ways you could do it, just to add a little more, you know, give fighters a little more sense of where their position in the sport is. So that would
I think what you're saying is it's surprising that they haven't been a little bit more, at least seems they haven't been a little bit more forward thinking, trying to head some of these things off in ways that really don't impact their business model that much. And like even for me, you know, well, I already told you guys, I hated the Hendo matchup before the fight. The fight was great. Hated the Hendo matchup, but then you do that and you give ammo for all the people who want to bring this lawsuit against you. But it's a little surprising that it seems that they haven't made small changes like they're just suggesting to try to prevent some of these potentially big issues. Like again, the forced free agency is a change your business model type of thing. That surprises me a little bit.
Well, also talk about giving ammo. They're making Zuffa boxing, and Dana White's getting into boxing, and so you're like, well, wait a minute. Your business model is that on the MMA side, they don't deserve these protections, but the guys that you sign on the boxing side, they deserve these protections. So, it just seems like you're giving more ammo to them. It's just, you know, you're like, well, that's just a strange that split on what side of the promotion what side of your company you're fighting for. You get this or not.
And what happens if if he allows UFC fighters to box on the Zuffa boxing side? So on one side you get disclosures, on the other side you don't get disclosures. It is very
and then odd. That it opens up the whole thing about again, there's a wide range of opinion from boxing attorneys, but it does open up the possibility that someone could also use the Ali Act to claim that the contract's in violation because we have to give up all of our rights. Boxers' rights are tied to their fight, not to their image rights in perpetuity to the promoter. That's almost unheard of in boxing. So and then you get the question of, okay, are you operating as a manager now? So it opens up more cans of worms. And I mean, I think we talked about this. I know we talked about this before. I always had the suspicion that UFC might get into boxing because conspiracy theory, because it's like, well, if we start doing boxing stuff, maybe we can play with the Ali Act on this side without damaging MMA. Then we can go back and say, okay, this doesn't affect this stuff now. Now we found a way to neuter the Ali Act in boxing first, and then bring it back to our core business. But based on the reaction and the testimony of Ratner, I don't think that's the case. I think the UFC has no plans to like rework the Ali Act. I think they're taking it serious and don't want it at all.
Jason had an intruder they had to deal with.
Yeah, I know.
Or a squirrel, one of the two.
It's gonna be one of those like news broadcasts where I'm like live on a live webisode. A member of the podcast got attacked and killed in front of two horrified friends.
But we have the video. Sorry about that.
Yeah, at least we might be able to solve it.
So did the boxing attorneys that you talked to, did they see any difference between contracts at Golden Boy and promoters like that and the fighters who are fighting for PBC? I mean, I know you aren't signed directly to the PBC, right? I don't believe so. You signed to their quote unquote sham promoters, but did they talk about a difference there given that Heyman was kind of trying to form a league in boxing?
Yeah, well, they talked a bit about that. Some guys did. I mean, the thing about Heyman, you have a separate agreement with Heyman. Heyman's your advisor, then you have your boxing promoter agreement. So Heyman's almost more of a manager agreement, which is, and thanks to the Golden Boy lawsuit, we now know who has standing. The reason you can't bring an Ollie Act violation case against Heyman is you have to be one of the boxers that were damaged, supposedly damaged, and that might explain why he pays his boxers so much, because they don't care that he's violating the Ollie Act. We're making, you know. But again, you know, I mean, shit, MMA fighters be happy. Look at Adrian Broner. I mean, that guy's made every fight, his last 10 fights have been over $1 million. And,
he's a big draw on Showtime, is it? I mean, that's
sort of, yeah. But
I mean, he brings the ratings for Showtime.
Well, I mean, I guess we could even go with, you know, like Brandon Rios or something like that too. You know, that guy's making $1 million a fight almost, and it's like they're not, you know, they're not monster draws. These are not GSP. You know, these are not and. No one in MMA is equivalent of that, I guess, that equivalent value. Like Jose Aldo is probably in those guys' ballpark, and he's not making as much as those guys are per fight. So, you know, but get back on track. What I was, they did talk about PBC. They just talked about how impossible some of them did, about how impossible to do what the UFC is in boxing, because there's already way too much competition. The talents. You know, like you said, you name every promoter in boxing, and you can say who one of their guys is one of the top guys in the world. You know, Top Rank has Lomachenko, K2 has Triple G, Golden Boy has Canelo. In other words, it's like no one dominates the industry so much that you can even attempt it. Although PBC apparently attempted it, blew through hundreds of millions.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you guys think about Invicta's attempt? Oh, I mean, we're talking about UFC boxing or Zuffa boxing, but Invicta's going to be doing boxing. Do you see a difference in the women's combat world there?
I think there's an opening for them, because women's boxing, and especially in America, in Latin America, I guess it's pretty big, I've heard, but in America, women's boxing hasn't really taken off. So I think they have an opening to carve a much, you know, they don't have a UFC to compete with in women's boxing in America. UFC, Invicta cannot ever get a big enough, can't grow too much in MMA, because UFC provides a bigger platform for female boxing, but female MMA, but female boxing, yeah, it's you know, I think that's why they're doing it. They see an opening, that there might be some interest in women's boxing, and that no one is there's so few platforms besides, you know, Clarissa Shields, so few women getting a spotlight on in boxing. This is their chance to make an impact. I would, and this is just speaking, if the Ollie Act gets passed, and I was a promoter in MMA, I would go nuts scouring for young talent and signing them to long-term deals, because a few years from now, you could maybe start putting them against each other, potentially build a guy big enough to basically jump in and steal one of the UFC's titles. If the sanctioning body comes in, you're like, you know, you've signed all the young guys, start putting them together 5 years from now, at the end of their terms, their contracts, 4 or 5 years, like, oh, my guys now, I built up a number 2 guy, number 3. I have all the good young guys. We have to get mandatory matches. So that would be just my poor advice.
You have to. I mean, you would have to have a huge bankroll for that. So.
But I don't know. MMA guys make so little. You could probably sign a lot of young guys to, you know. I mean, that boxing, boxing guys lose money on almost all their fighters.
Yeah, that's
because they're looking for the one payday. You're just taking the boxing model, but those young guys are probably cheaper in MMA than they are in boxing. You know, there's no one knows their value in MMA. You offer a guy like, well, we'll give you $10,000 a fight, and we'll give you 4 fights a year for 3 years with the 2-year option at the end of the ball. Oh, that's great for most guys, and you're not realizing, we're going to make a fortune if this guy pans out. God, why did I say that? This should have been our business model. We could have got into this there.
Pool our money. Let's go.
I'm giving Alliance MMA a whole new business model.
Hey, Alliance has access to potentially $20 million now.
Yeah, so
Let's do it, guys.
They could be in position, sign a bunch of young guys ready to develop, and jump into the 3 year. And the Ollie Act comes in effect 2-3 years later, when a mandatory challenger comes in effect. They're there with all their fighters. Sudden takeover of the business.
Well, that's always been my thing. The UFC is crazy if they're not trying to do that already, just because. Yeah, just because this industry is so what's the word I'm looking for? Superstar driven, right? In terms of, well, we think, well, that leads into another thing in terms of revenues and profitability, you'd think, but then we had Dana White's statement. Remember that that this is their best year ever, when all the observable metrics are that everything's down this year significantly.
But then he clarified that he's including McGregor Mayweather. McGregor.
So how much do you think? What would your estimate be on how much they made off of that? 40 million? Or?
No. Remember though, they were the promoter. I have the pay stub from the Athletic Commission. It says that Zuffa was the promoter of McGregor. Yeah. They had to go through. So that means that the money, the revenue that came from that split went to them first before it went to McGregor. So if you're going to count that revenue, and let's say it was a 70-30 split, that's the rumor I heard, 70 Mayweather, 30 McGregor. Well, if it did over 600 million, you're talking 200 million in revenue suddenly flowing to they can add to their balance sheet. We made 200 million in revenue from this one fight.
Oh, that's like Groupon accounting. Remember them? That's like Groupon accounting. That you can't do that.
Yes, you can. That's gross.
You can, but
that's gross.
You can, but you can't.
That's gross. There's that. That's being honest. That's their gross revenue, that they had 200 million in revenue. So that offsets three. That's as much as all three of McGregor's fights last year made for him, revenue wise. Then you throw in that that they had an uptick, and they have their TV rights and a lot of their sponsorship rights. They have new sponsors, all went up because I guess they probably made 20-25 more million this year off Fox than they did the previous year, because it goes up every year. So that's another 50 million in revenue just in the growth of their already existing deals, contracts. So add 50 million. So revenue wise, they made over 700 million last year. Shit, they might make 758. Who knows? Blow past that just because of the Mayweather McGregor. The question is how much of that gross McGregor Mayweather money do they get to keep to add to their profits? I don't know. I mean, I heard before that they got about a third of it. Maybe they got half. If they got half, that's huge. That's 100 million that they, let's say after their expenses, 95 million. I don't think their expenses were that high. Their expenses after they paid McGregor too, for, that'd be the big part. But yeah, so at least, anywhere from 50 to 100 million in profit they made off that fight.
Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, that circles over. If you just look purely at the UFC pay-per-views, they're down. But this one fight really, this is why they do the fights, because they did that fight because of just how much excess money they made off of it. I think that you'll see more of an aggressive strategy from the UFC to garner sponsorships. They just signed an airline sponsorship. They have the body armor as their official drink now. I think you'll see a lot more of that, a lot more of an aggressive strategy to make official sponsors up for the UFC. But yeah, it was a once in a lifetime fight that you could grab $100 million in just one night, basically. So.
Yeah, what's funny is if what John's saying is true, is that's what companies who aren't making money do. Right? When you're unprofitable, like growth company, you focus on your revenue, right? Best year, look at our revenue growth. This is amazing, right? When you're a profitable company, that's not you want revenue growth, but that's not your key metric. You wouldn't call it the best year ever if you had best revenue and not that great profits, right? So,
especially when you're including with something that's not your core business. It's a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Oh, we had a one-time cash infusion. We're going to call that our profit this year. That So yeah, that's what's interesting too. Same vein is with GSP coming back. I just had a thought about McGregor. No fighter in MMA is equaled McGregor in fan interest. He's brought so many fans in, but he hasn't fought in UFC for a while, and he brought all these fans in that aren't really paid. They're casually maybe paying attention to UFC, but they're aimlessly wandering. Now GSP stands in that void. He might have really catapulted himself to another level with his performance against Bisping, because there's no one else for the casual fan that occasionally wants to latch onto. So he comes in with a legacy that everybody's talking about, even if you weren't familiar with him, then puts on a great performance and is kind of charismatic, and a lot of women like him, which is why I don't like the guy. But besides that, former girlfriends used to have the hots for him and just nuts. But that's why I just have a strange feeling in my head that GSP might come out of this a bigger star than when he went out. And he was a big star, but he might be now maybe not Rousey and McGregor, but just below them. You know, that he gained a lot from this fight. So good for him.
Yeah, you know, I think that definitely it also helps with the Canada market.
Yeah.
I think that it reinvigorates that market as well with GSP, and you know, he comes off as the opposite of McGregor, where few tattoos, I guess, for GSP. Wholesome looking guy, good looking guy, like as John alluded to, and you know, he's a marketable guy that the UFC could use. And just going back to the best year ever, I think that the concern now, we're talking about forward thinking, is next year if they don't have a huge, you know, Mayweather McGregor type matchup, you know, the headlines. UFC down $100 million from last year, you know, or something, you know, or you know, they'll ask Dana White how they're doing. I mean, that comparable. So anyway, I just thought that would be interesting to look into 2018, unless they're anticipate a bigger year with matchmaking. So
I will just add that that my wife loves GSP. I can confirm that. Jason, how about you?
You know, actually, GSP is one of the only fighters that my wife knows about. Yeah, she's not into the UFC, but like, yeah, she knows GSP. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I don't know if she really likes GSP. So,
and John evidently breaks up with girlfriends who like GSP.
No, well, I just don't date people that like MMA anymore. That's my, you know, it's not. Tell you what, it's not an incredible turn on when they tell you I would walk over you to sleep with him. I'm like, oh, that's just not. You're really not giving me the ego boost I need right now.
but then they finished that with, but that's probably not going to happen.
Well,
so
they finished
highly
with,
unlikely.
And I finished with I'm the only one here, so just screw you. You're out of luck, damn it.
There you go. All right, guys. Anything else you can think of? Anything we missed?
The sport is doomed. It's going to be destroyed by the Ali Act. It's going to, you know, which is that's what the naysayers say. I think it's no, we didn't miss anything. That's it.
I've been told that I should attend one of the boxing association meetings where they do the actual votes in terms of rankings, because I've been told that it's quite a show.
Really?
I wanted. Oh yeah, I've been told
it's
something that I have. I don't think so, but you know, I've been told that it's something that you have to see. That it's quite an experience. So I don't know. I'll leave it at that. I don't know what that means, but
are there fist fights? That'll be. Are there fist fights in the?
I have no idea. I have no idea. But all right, on behalf of John Nash and Jason Cruz, I'm Paul Gift, reminding you to keep doing business as usual.